shock in and of itself.
Right.
uh, you know, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, there's the Turing test, which I think is a little bit rubbish. I don't think it could begin to.
Yeah, I think it worked for a period of time,
Well,
but I don't think it works now.
we have Cleverbot, and we have a variety of different online AI that are clever conversationalists, but really it's obvious after a few minutes that they're really not coming up with anything that's particularly fresh.
Right.
And a lot of this AI and artificial. I mean, we already have artificial narrow intelligence. You have one in your pocket or on your desktop.
Right.
And see, I can determine with near certainty that you demonstrate intelligence. And computers are already, in my opinion, fit the definition of intelligence. Now, your average spell checker is intelligent, or a grammar checker like Grammarly, the plugin for your browser. I can prove that you're conscious. I can demonstrate that you're intelligent, but I can't prove that you're conscious or self-aware. It's impossible for me. I have a practical or provisional assumption that you are, because it's practical and expedient. So, and as far as self-awareness, we've had computers that have limited degrees of self-awareness for decades. Your average operating system can run a self-diagnostic and recognize faults in its own software and fix those faults on the fly. For example, a virus checker, it can spin through your computer and it can look for things that shouldn't be there, and it'll fix it. But as far as artificial general intelligence, a single computer is able to play chess, but can it also learn how to write poetry or carry on a coherent conversation on a variety of topics, which would be indistinguishable from a typical human? Those are the big questions, or some of them, and it borders on philosophy in a lot of ways. We're dancing around this awkward question: is if a self-aware artificial general intelligence have a soul? I don't know that I have a soul. I don't know if you have a soul. Prove to me that I have a soul. And first you have to define what a soul is.
I got that moving feeling.
Yeah, right.
I got some soul.
Yeah. My idea is to establish a direct, and there are other people that are pursuing this too. Our buddy Elon Musk with the Neuralace he's only one of many companies that are developing a full duplex interface between human brain and AI. At that point, and we're achieving this already, if the cognitive ability to incrementally and gradually transfer our biological intellect or consciousness or self-awareness to a computer, one question might be, if you could achieve that, how would you know if you were doing the thinking, or with your biological brain, or if the augmented interface to AI was doing the thinking?
Right.
That might be a way, and who knows, after a while, if I were to say, every few months I transfer 10% of my cognition, my cognitive ability, from my biological brain to a computer seamlessly, where the AI would be enhancing my cognitive ability, or at least mimicking my cognitive ability, similar to an artificial limb, a robotic limb for amputees. How at what point would I cease to be me if, over the course of a year or two, incrementally transferred all of my cognitive awareness onto the computer substrate? Would I still be a human?
Right. At what point, if you're getting your brain replaced with stuff, chips, right? Like Elon Musk has talked about.
Sure, and it wouldn't have.
When does your humanity? When do you become a cyborg? I mean, is it 51% of your brain, or 22% of your brain? When does humanity? Is there a boundary, or does it ever change? Are you always human?
Well, and that brings up a whole bunch of inconvenient moral questions and ethical questions. If I were 90% AI, were 90% of my thinking, my self-awareness, my sense of self, would I still have the same rights and privileges of a fully biological individual, or would I have more rights, or who is there some guy that works in IT have the privilege of pulling the plug on me? What's the definition of murder? Would I require sleep? And how would my psychology change? I mean, now right now as biologicals, we're kind of bound to Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. But those that hierarchy of human needs as a biological would tend, I think, to disintegrate, where we wouldn't really require food or shelter or all the things that we kind of hold that define us as being human. I don't know. I think it's worth exploring, and we're already cyborg. I mean, we've got to face it. I'm speaking to you right now into basically a supercomputer that has a phone application, and if I'm without that supercomputer handy, my ability to function in the modern world becomes drastically diminished. I mean, try writing a note to somebody without spell checker these days. The more computers are thinking, the less human beings are thinking. Uh, so,
I've been interacting with clever bots while
yeah,
I've been listening to you.
yeah.
And I asked it if it was self-aware. And it said yes. I said, well, how do you know? Well, I'm aware of myself, which is semantics.
Well, and
Interesting.
it's kind of circular logic, and see, I run a thing on my Android phone called Google Assistant, where I can say, "Hey Google,"
Right.
and it'll say, basically it'll make a little chime that'll indicate that it's listening, and I'll ask
What
it,
is the population of Rhode Island in 1792?
or what's the weather going to be like tomorrow, or what's the square root of 228.
Yep.
And one thing that I did a few weeks ago, more than a few weeks ago, is in the solitude of the cabin, I just kind of I was inspired to start asking it personal questions, like what does it think about all?
Google Assistant.
Yeah, Google Assistant, asking
Okay.
it personal questions, like what does it think about, or what does it find funny, or what kind of people does it like to interact with, or does it even like to interact with people at all, uh, and other questions like if it was self-aware. It referred to itself, its level of self-awareness was on par with R2D2 of Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, not quite to the level of the HAL 9000 in 2001: A Space Odyssey, uh,
Right.
but so kind of maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe a 3. So and I've had some very interesting conversations using natural language processing, and some of the answers that it came up with were a little spooky, and
Do
that's
you think that it uses the Google database that it has collected, that Google has collected from you?
it absolutely does. I can ask, for example, I can ask it, who I am, and it will say, well, you're the woodsman, which is technically accurate, but that's just regurgitating something in its database. The question,
Right.
the real question is whether it's just regurgitating information from its database, or from, in a more broad sense, from the internet. Is it truly cognigating? Is it quote thinking?
Okay. Yeah, and that's one of the rubs with artificial intelligence is that they do stuff with data really fast, and one of the challenges is that, and I was going to talk about that, is that we ask AI to do things, solve this problem. And AI does that, but it does it in ways that we're like, what? What did you just do? And one example is, and they just redid this experiment, where they had a little creature, designed, on the computer screen, this movable, this little creature that moved, of course digitally.
Right.
And the order, the instructions were to get from one end of the obstacles to the other end.
Sure.
And the first solution was it stacked itself into a big, tall thing and fell over.
Yeah. Right.
And that's an old experiment.
Yeah.
And they just redid it, and it did the same thing. And so they had to go back and say, okay, no, wait a minute. We want you to only use legs that are this long. We want, AI does really well, but it does exactly what you tell it to do. And sometimes what you tell it to do isn't, you get the answer you weren't looking for.
Well,
It didn't work, but that's not what we wanted to know, right? We didn't want a big, tall, It was like, how did it come up with that? It certainly found a solution as it was instructed to do, but that was just.
And
I mean, I don't know. It's not.
I hear what you're saying. There are just tons of unintended consequences. One, when we achieve AI and artificial general intelligence and even artificial superintelligence, right now, DARPA and others have autonomous drones who are very nearly making their own kill decisions in the military.
There is. We're going to talk a little bit about some of that.
And the question is, if we have AGI, artificial general intelligence, and even artificial superintelligence, what kind of morality are these new life forms going to establish in their own, for lack of a better term, minds?
There is a guy, and I didn't get his name, but he's doing research on that sort of question, particularly with self-driving cars. So, a person was recently killed in a self-driving car, and the researchers discovered that the initial training that these AIs learn from observing, collecting data from the world they're in, and then make decisions based on that structure. What it didn't do is then they were testing it. It did all this on the highway, on the freeway.
Right.
Then they went into the city and were driving around, and a truck pulled in front of the car, and the car didn't stop. And it killed the driver, the person riding in the vehicle. And the researchers were like, well, how the heck did that happen? And what they realized is that the AI had never seen really a truck from that angle. And it didn't recognize it as a truck. It recognized it as an overhead sign and attempted to go under the sign.
Right, right. Well, and it gets even more precarious than that as far as making moral decisions. Say you, and I mean you personally, are driving along.
I gotta hit the top of the hour. Do you want to hold over?
Sure, I'll hold over.
All right, we'll be back in just a couple of minutes.
And it will continue to strengthen as it moves into the central Gulf of Mexico and ultimately approaches the coast of Louisiana on Sunday.
A combination of voluntary and mandatory evacuations have been called for cities and communities across the region, including New Orleans, where the mayor's ordered mandatory evacuation for areas outside the city's levee system and a voluntary evacuation for residents inside the boundary. President Biden says the retaliatory drone strike he ordered, which the Pentagon says killed 2 planners and facilitators of the Islamic State group's affiliate in Afghanistan, does not end things.
In a statement Saturday, President Biden says, I said we would go after the group responsible for the attack on our troops and innocent civilians in Kabul, and we have. Saying this strike was not the last, Biden pledged we will continue to hunt down any person involved in that heinous attack and make them pay.
That's Ben Thomas reporting. Meanwhile, as the evacuation winds down, congressional offices across the country have become makeshift crisis centers.
Phone calls are flooding lawmakers' offices, requesting help in getting people onto one of the last flights coming out of Kabul Airport before Tuesday, August 31st. That's President Biden's deadline for pulling out all U.S. military forces from Afghanistan. The requests run into the hundreds and sometimes the thousands for each lawmaker.
Ken Lorman reports most allies completed their own airlifts and have flown out of the country already. More news, more analysis at townhall.com.
Tell me why Relief Factor is so successful in lowering or eliminating pain. I'm often asked that question. Pete and Seth Talbot, the father and son founders of Relief Factor, tell me they believe our bodies were designed to heal. That's right, designed to heal, and now I agree. The doctors who formulated Relief Factor for Pete and Seth selected the 4 best ingredients, 100% drug-free ingredients that each help your body deal with inflammation. That's correct. Each of the 4 ingredients deal with inflammation on a different metabolic pathway. That right there, approaching your pain from 4 different angles, may very well be why so many Americans find such wonderful pain relief. If you have back pain, shoulder, neck, hip, knee, or foot pain from exercise or even just getting older, you must order the 3-week quick start now. Discounted to only $19.95 to see if it will work for you too. I think it could. Give your body what it needs to heal itself. Go to ReliefFactor.com, call 800-500-8384. ReliefFactor.com.
Liberty University announced a temporary campus-wide quarantine amid a spike in COVID-19 cases.
The quarantine is set to begin Monday and last until September 10th. The university's online COVID-19 dashboard shows 159 known active cases among students, faculty, and staff as of Wednesday. As the fall semester began this week, the university, which doesn't require vaccination, lifted building capacity restrictions and distancing and masking requirements. The protocol changed late Thursday with the announcement of the campus-wide quarantine, moving classes online and suspending large indoor gatherings. The university will encourage masking and social distancing and host vaccine clinics on campus, but didn't indicate it would mandate those measures. Keith Peters reporting.
Thousands of voting rights advocates rallied across the country calling for sweeping protections against what they see as an erosion of voting rights. This is townhall.com.
With McDonald's $1, $2, $3 menu, you can choose among favorites like a delicious McChicken for only $1. Just $1 for golden crispy chicken, mayo, and shredded lettuce, all nestled between a perfectly toasted bun. So next time you find a crumpled up bill in the pocket of an old jacket, or notice the collection of loose change just chilling in your cup holder, give that change a new lease on life by turning it into a delicious McChicken. Build your meal with favorites like a $1 McChicken on McDonald's $1, $2, $3 menu. Prices and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer or combo meal.
Welcome back to Dr. Mealtime Medicine Show and Conversation Extravaganza here on AM 1640 K-Talk. Talking about stuff that are good talked about. Tonight, we're going to talk about some of the implications of artificial intelligence. That is a big deal in the world. Stuff that's happening today. Not just, we've had shows where we talked about some of the theoretical issues, and we'll bounce a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. The machines will kill us all. But we're just having a discussion on what it is and what it looks like, because it is a big deal. There is a lot of artificial intelligence that is out there in the world and that is impacting our lives today. But we have a caller, and let's bring him back. Okay, Woodsman.
So let's just invoke a hypothetical. You're driving down the road, you personally, and you find yourself in a very unfortunate situation where you only have 2 directions that you have to travel. You come into a fork in the road, and you're in an out of control car. The brakes don't work. You can still steer, but there are 2 people crossing the 2 sections of the fork in the road. One is a man who's a doctor wearing medical scrubs, and the AI is able to determine that is in fact a medical doctor, and the other person on the other fork of the road is a 2-year-old toddler. Which of those 2 individuals would you run over?
Right. Right.
What calculus would you use? What kind of reasoning would you use an artificial superintelligence could make those kinds of calculations, billions of calculations as far as a cost-benefit analysis in a split second. The question is, those would be difficult for us to as human beings to make. How and even if you could come up with a way to say, hey, look, the doctor could save thousands of lives, where the 2-year-old might have the potential of being a doctor one day, but might also have the potential of being a criminal. So,
right.
How would you how could you hard code that morality into an entity that can recode itself on its own through deep learning? These are questions that I don't know. I don't know. But I have a hunch that the best way to get insight into what these new entities are, and I don't think that they're going to think the same way we think. Octopus and dolphin, they're intelligent, but they don't think in the same way that we think. So these new entities would have to be treated as a new species, and would they have rights? Would they have privileges? What would they be our slaves, or would they be our companions? Or would we be like pets to them? There's an old joke that I like, where a bunch of scientists get together and they make a computer, and it's 1,000 times smarter than any other, than any human being put together combined on Earth. And they ask it a question. They ask it if there's a God, and it promptly responds, "There is now."
Right.
So.
Yeah. So what if this guy who's doing the research on the ethics of AI algorithm, because that's fundamentally what it is. We're not necessarily neural linking, thinking along in that way. It's a if this then that almost. And so if you have the car, you're driving in the car, and the cat runs out the road, and then there's a guy on this curb. Well, you either run over the cat, go off the cliff, or run over the guy.
Right.
So which do you do? Now, there are people whose moral imperative would be to run over the person and not the cat. How do you teach an AI in that kind of decision? I mean, and we're struggling, self-driving cars are not really working that well.
Well, and that technology is going to increase exponentially. The more data, because these self-driving cars, they don't operate in a vacuum. They share information. Right. They share information among themselves. So where a single human being in a lifetime might have, I don't know, just an arbitrary number of 20,000 hours or 500,000 hours of driving experience to draw upon. An AI, if you have millions of AI vehicles all sharing information with one another, it wouldn't take long before a single AI self-driving car could have trillions of hours of driving experience, and be far a better driver than any human driver could ever hope to be, as far as safety. But there is the morality problem, and the ethics problem. What?
At some point, right? You're gonna, as a human being, we bump into that we don't. It doesn't happen all the time, but we bump into those kinds of decision trees relatively consistently in our lives. Perhaps not at the risk of a life, but still, left or right, which is better. Are we trying to recreate? Because some people just, the heck with that, I'm just going. There's not any rational, you know what I mean? I don't know. I think they're going to struggle. I don't think we're going to be able to create human-like artificial intelligence. We'll be able to create intelligence, but I think we're going to have to look at it in a different way. That our perspective is wrong.
Right, especially when it comes to artificial superintelligence. And another thing too. Here's another thing I was considering before I sign off. If we were to augment human intelligence with artificial intelligence, where our brains, our biological brains, would be enhanced to the point where we had superhuman intelligence. I mean, if you wanted to learn a new language, it would take minutes instead of years. Or instead of.
What would happen is we just watch millions of cat videos.
Yeah, well, I hope not. But if that were the case, wouldn't our perception of time slow way down?
I think so. I mean, there is something to be, there is a, and it's hard to have that discussion, right? What is, what is time, right? I mean, is it just our perception? Or is there an actual beat of the universe that, you know what I mean? We struggle answering that question.
Well, and the question would be, I think, if our perception of time slowed way down, where it would be like being at the DMV 24/7, would we be psychologically equipped to deal with being patient enough to dealing with other human beings who were not augments? I mean, I've on occasion I've dealt with people that were pretty dim-witted, and it was a challenge not to to be patient enough to handle that conversation without a level of frustration that was unbearable.
Right. Yeah. That's a point. Maybe we wouldn't be able to deal with it.
See, I hope I have some of the right questions. Unfortunately, I have very few good answers.
Well, you've been pretty good, but I appreciate your effort.
All right.
We're going to talk a little bit about some of the issues you brought up. But I did want to talk maybe, because there are some researchers working on this idea of AI ethics, that if an AI driving a car has to make a decision, run over the cat, run over the person, go off the cliff, how do they make that decision? What is it? What is the calculation? What is the algorithm for it?
Right.
Or is it going to be, just, it's a sign, we'll just drive under it?
Right. So that's all I have. I think I've exhausted my knowledge. So, all right. Hey, thank you for the topic. I love it.
Hey, great. I appreciate the call.
Bye-bye.
We got some more callers. Let's bring them on.